Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, July 7th, 2021. Time for, you know what it is. It's time for another show. Good morning. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. I am reliably informed via the Twitter machines. Today is, as I reminded everybody, and Bill picks up on, today is World Chocolate Day, among other things. But Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, didn't bring enough for the rest of the class because today is also World Gimmitarianism Day. So I am owning all your chocolates. I guess that's true. And, sad trombone emoji. Is there even an emoji for that? How would you convey that it's, I guess you could have frowny face and then a trombone, but they won't give me the trombone emoji that I need for this. But I could do the sound effect, but it would cut off our beautiful live news show music that goes on in the background here. So we'll wait until later. There's plenty to play sad trombones for, and plenty to be just, actually consciously, genuinely sad about. There's some... there's all sorts of craziness going on in our own news, which I guess is distracting us from the craziness of the world news. If you're looking at what's going on in the world that you need to know about, I guess you'd have to start with the president of Haiti has been assassinated. That was something of a surprise this morning. And I'm still not exactly sure how to absorb that or even how to, report on it other than to make note of the fact that it has happened. And I would read you the story. I guess I'm sure we'll be talking about it. I know that's got to be in the roundup with Greg. Greg will be here any minute, I'm sure, to discuss a lot of things, but there's a lot of craziness going on. So it might not have made your radar yet. It was just reported this morning. And I don't even know how to pronounce the name of the Haitian president, because, I don't speak French, and not only that, it doesn't even look traditionally, I guess, I don't know, French, I don't know how to pronounce the name, and we don't discuss the presidency of Haiti all that often, certainly not on this show, but even in American news, which is kind of a travesty and one of our own weird, I guess, the product of our own weird self-centeredness. But the president, I guess, did they say Jovenel Moise? I have no idea. Moise, and there's like the umlaut over the I. I don't even know how to pronounce that. And maybe somebody with a better understanding of it can do it. And maybe what I can do is during one of the breaks, I'll look something up. Maybe there's a video somewhere where someone will pronounce the name for me. I got to go and get a foreign news source for that because, 9 times out of 10, the rest of America's news sources aren't going to pronounce it correctly either. But he was assassinated. I guess it doesn't, I don't know. I don't know whether it comes as a shock to people there or elsewhere. In reading about the background, of course, I find myself woefully underprepared to discuss what's going on in Haiti because we ignore Haiti because, I guess, unfortunately, not only was the shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and it doesn't matter guy right, but the everything else is a asshole country guy was right too. Basically, I will say this, he's passed himself off as a populist thus far. In that sense, I think he's got his finger on the pulse of America. Most Americans don't know what's going on in Haiti and don't feel bad about it either. But apparently he was assassinated at his residence, his private residence. I don't know if there's an official residence where he spends a great deal of time or not. But apparently his wife was shot but survived the attack and is currently hospitalized. And as the AP's report on the situation notes, even before the assassination, Haiti had grown increasingly unstable, which is something, unfortunately, we're a little bit too used to, I guess, here in the country. But this country, increasingly unstable and disgruntled under this presidency. The president, it says here, notes, ruled by decree for more than 2 years after the country failed to hold elections, and the opposition demanded that he step down in recent months. Just makes an interesting segue, of course, into the idea that our previous president attempted to continue to rule by decree. And I've frequently asked over his failure with the COVID-19 disease why, or whether history would demand to know why we never hanged Donald Trump. But, well, he didn't hold on in the presidency. I guess that probably argued in his favor in terms of saving him from the extremist elements who might otherwise actually act on such a impulse. But at any rate, it seems awfully strange, one, that we haven't paid that much attention to the fact that there's somebody in our neighborhood who's been holding on to power for 2 years despite having no legitimate claim to it. But given that we almost had the same thing happen here in the United States, I don't know how critical we can be. I don't think anybody's intention is to be critical of Haiti and the Haitian political situation at this moment. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring that to your attention. It's news to me and probably news to many of you, and not news that I've got a real deep understanding of how to feel about something like that, given the background of what's going on there. So I will tell you this: I won't tell anybody anywhere, whether they're Haitian or read the news about Haiti, how to feel about that particular bit of news. It's a shock to me, and we've got a lot of catching up to do. But luckily, there's plenty of news about which we are more informed and would be more adept at commenting on. And Greg Dworkin has got the rest of that in addition to the morning shocking news. Hi, Greg. How are you?
Hey, good morning. So I have a whole bunch of stuff that, it's
shocking
we can pretend we know more about than we actually do, and then we can talk about it.
Yes. All right. Let's try some of that. Just noting for the record, you can't let it pass that the neighboring country's president has been assassinated.
No, here's the professional response. More to come on that.
Yes. Okay.
That's news speak for. I don't know what the heck is going on. I need some time to read up on this.
Right. Yeah, that's true, and I really do. All right. Well, I know how my afternoon's going. All right.
Maybe some of the better news sources might be the Florida expat community. They may have some things to say about that.
Yes, they might, if they're not busy with being hit by a hurricane or having all their residential buildings collapse.
Yeah, that too.
Boat parades.
How much of the residential collapse did we wind up covering? I can't even remember anymore because we had a couple of days that
not that much.
We were not on the air. At least I wasn't. Right.
Not that much. It hasn't been a big part of our show. I mean, I guess we've noted the fact that it was happening, but now that they're uncovering all sorts of interesting facts, like Florida, for some reason, politically, it just sort of thinks you don't have to inspect buildings anymore. Or if you do, and there's something wrong with it, you can pay off.
The main point I wanted to note is just how difficult it is. Mm-hmm. If you have a situation where money is involved,
yes,
and lots of it sometimes, to have a situation where a amateur volunteer, if you will, elected condo board, is going to take charge and try to manage multi-million-dollar assessments of the residents and repairs. Yeah, because the bottom line there is a lot of people run for the board on the platform of, great services, no taxes.
Right. Well,
I promise you, I will not increase your assessment. Well, what about, repairing the building so the building doesn't fall down? Well, the main thing is not to increase your assessment.
Yes, right. You'll be able to take all the money we save you and go out a lot so that you're not here when the building collapses.
Right. And so people get, really upset when you give them assessments that would, in fact, go for repair. And they say, this is too much. I'm running against you. My platform's going to be no assessments, which, by the way, also means no repair. Mm-hmm. But then they win. And then you have these contentious arguments about whether or not to spend any money on repair. And then you don't.
And then the building collapses. And, all of these things follow. But a familiar scene, and also, of course, the continuing Republican insistence on dismantling all regulatory schemes. So the board is not only giving you, all your Christmas candy all at once, but they're not responsible to anyone either.
And then throw in climate change, and then maybe even throw in a little bit of, okay, maybe we skimped a little bit on some of the steel that went into originally building the building.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, maybe
Trump
there's another large building next to us that's perhaps encroaching on ours, and they'll pay us off to not notice, and boom. And when I say boom, I mean big boom.
Yeah. Well, these things do happen, and Donald Trump finds himself in the middle of a lot of such things.
I mention those things not to point fingers, but simply to say that there's probably a lot of buildings that are in the situation where their condo boards don't want to spend money on repairs.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? If you look at the strip of land, Miami Beach and places like it in Florida, issues.
Yeah,
There's a
I
lot
would
of
think
issues.
so.
What happens to the market there? People are going to move in, move out. What's going on? We'll have to see.
Yes,
more to come.
More to come, right. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, well, it's all that empowerment stuff where you just let residents, govern themselves. It's kind of an annoying problem.
Yeah, well, speaking of governance and govern themselves,
Yes.
A lot of issues going on with that too. I think
Right,
we'll get
true.
to, sort
Condo
of
boards do
democracy.
a lot
But I
of
wanted
good
to start
things.
with the pandemic and
Okay.
sort of get that out of the way.
Oh, yeah, all right. Well, please.
We hit our July 4th target. That is to say, it became July 4th. And another
true.
target was to try to get 70% of Americans to at least get one dose, those who were eligible. And we fell just short, but did pretty well in terms of getting as far as we did. Now, a lot of the reason we didn't hit 70% is because Republicans are resisting it, but not just Republicans. There are rural areas that are resisting it. There are people of color that are resisting it. And some are access issues, predictably, and predominantly in the Hispanic Latino community. And interestingly enough, yes, we know that the worst states for vaccination are very red, and the best states for vaccination are very blue, and that's starting to show up in terms of death rates. But we also know, interestingly enough, just to mix things up a little bit, that if you're over 65, it doesn't matter where you live. Chances are you're going to have been vaccinated. The over 65 group is doing fairly well in getting their vaccines no matter where they are. It's the younger than that groups that are sort of having issues.
Well, they got the vaccine first when everyone was still excited about it. The resistance hadn't.
Yeah, there's reasons, but
and
also they were the ones dying. So
afraid of getting killed.
When I say they, I mean we, since I'm in that group.
Oh, well, I mean they.
And so it's like, okay, let me pay attention to this. Maybe it's not fake news. Maybe people I know are in the hospital.
Yeah. Right. So okay. Well done there. They got to have a July 4th.
Right. David Rothkopf has an interesting thread about this. He says, when the president has overseen mobilization of vast resources to ensure anyone in the U.S. who wants a vaccine can get one, and that's almost true, 18 states have hit the 70% vaccination target. 67% of eligible Americans have received at least one dose of the vaccine. And the ones who have hit the target all voted for Biden. All but 3 of those with the lowest rates have supported Trump. The failure to hit the target clearly falling victim to GOP politicization of the vaccine and other pandemic control measures. Then articles about this, people writing about this, should read, red states failed to meet vaccine targets, or GOP anti-vaccine stance undermines U.S. effort to hit 70% goal. Mm-hmm. That's what they should say.
Refuse to cooperate.
Biden's vaccine program has been a huge success, so the resistance to it, when all science shows the value of taking the vaccine, is the scandal in the story. Presenting it any other way is a failure of journalism and judgment.
All right.
And there's been plenty of failures of journalism and judgment, so, that fits in. But Dante Cine, who's a data journalist, and also helps I guess he's staff at something called American Communities, which look at various and different mixtures of demographics, has an interesting graph here. I put it right at the end of the stuff I sent you this morning with a link, looking at the percent of people who are fully vaccinated. And, it makes the point that if you're going to look at who's vaccinated the most, the percent of people who are fully vaccinated, the highest groups are basically the suburbs. Okay. So clearly education has something to do with it. Now, this particular group, American Communities, divides the country and explains what they mean by it into groups like urban suburbs, middle suburbs, big cities, college towns, rural middle America, graying America, aging farmlands, even LDS enclaves, military posts, exurbs, working class country, evangelical hubs. And so when you look at those who have been vaccinated the most, it's urban and middle suburbs. Okay. So those folks are getting vaccinated.
Good idea.
Big cities, too. They're pretty good. And so are Native American areas, college towns,
right.
Rural middle America. They're all doing well. Graying America, not so much. And aging farmlands and military posts and the exurbs, not keeping pace with the urban and middle suburbs. And evangelical hubs are doing toward the bottom, the African American South below that, and the lowest group are Hispanic centers. And again, that's where you get to the point where some of this is access. Not all of it is intent. So when Biden goes out and says, well, I have to, do more, and I have to, get mobile vans, and we have to go to the community and get the community people involved, all that's true. But there's no question about the fact that part of this, at least, has been resistance on the part not just of the residents. It's really not fair to blame it just on them. It's the governors, and it's the structure in Republican-led states that make it difficult. Take Mississippi, for example. I mean, basically Mississippi's attitude is if you're in a predominantly black area, you're on your own. Too bad. Not just about this, but everything, education, right. Whatever. So it's just a fascinating, not necessarily in a good way, look at how the country is trying to approach what is essentially a huge problem. And the huge problem is that the Delta variant is rising. It's now probably around a quarter of cases. People who wind up in the hospital are unvaccinated. If you've been vaccinated, you're in pretty good shape. This is pretty well illustrated. Howie Foreman did a good job of illustrating this, looking at Russia versus Britain. The UK is having a surge of Delta infections, but very few people are dying because a lot of them are vaccinated. Russia has very much fewer vaccinated people, and the people who have been vaccinated with the Russian vaccine that doesn't work that well.
Oh, wow.
And so cases in Russia are not only surging, but deaths are surging as well. So the difference between the vaccinated country and the unvaccinated country is pretty stark. Now, here in the U.S., again, we're going to have a bifurcated situation. Those who have been vaccinated are going to be in pretty good shape no matter which vaccine you got. And those who haven't, that's something that we're going to watch. And this isn't doom and gloom or doomed any of that stuff. We're going to have surges. They're going to be red state surges. And they're not going to be nearly as bad as last year. But they're going to be increases that are going to strain hospitals, and people are going to die. And these are like regular, ordinary people, and that can be avoided are something to really be upset about.
I guess so. Well, we'll have that opportunity, it appears.
So, we'll see what happens. As the Delta variant gets more publicized, we'll see whether or not it changes any minds. Some things do, and July 4th was an artificial construct. Let's do this by July 4th because, let's pick a date. Yeah, so it was a stretch goal, almost there. It doesn't mean you have to stop vaccinating once you get to that date. Just do more. Just keep doing it.
Yeah. Right. If you didn't get your vaccine but meant to, okay. You know what? It's all right. Even Joe Biden says it's okay if you get vaccinated on July 7th.
Right. So one of the things that's also happened with July 4th is we're getting to, and this I suppose was yesterday with July 6th, we're getting to what some people call the 6-month anniversary. Now, saying that it's a 6-month anniversary is like mentioning a 5-book trilogy. You know, it gets people really upset because it's not the proper use of the word. Yes. But it's the 6-month anniversary of the January 6th insurrection. And there's been a couple of pieces which I found of interest, because this is something that you will recall that I predicted to you a while ago, and that is that, no, this isn't going to just drop down the memory hole, predominantly because a lot of the reporters who were covering this were in the building at the time, and they're not letting it go. And there's no reason to think that that's going to happen in future here. There's a piece on this in Vice, so angry, reporters who survived the Capitol riot are still struggling. The reporters who survived insurrection are still covering Congress, but things don't feel normal. Casey Hunt tweeted that this morning with the quote, "Some reporters who were there won't go back into the building. A number have sought therapy to deal with the trauma. One longtime Capitol Hill reporter opted for early retirement shortly after living through the riot. Many still aren't sleeping well." And Garrett Hake, also at NBC, retweeted Casey and said, 6 months later, "Don't tell me it was a normal tourist day on the Hill or even a typical protest."
All right. I won't.
Adam Goldman, New York Times. "My day started with a man from Alabama collapsing in front of me." Jamie Ross. "I watched it all unfold live in MSNBC. I was as scared for all reporters as I was police in House and Senate. I can't watch the footage. It pains me too much." So there's still a lot of this stuff. And again, I look at this, and the suggestion that somehow or other this will fall in the memory hole is ridiculous. The fact that it appears to not be covered with the seriousness that it deserves in some quarters is deliberate. Not because folks have decided, oh, there's another shiny object, we can forget about this. There's a deliberate attempt to whitewash this and make this go away and go down the memory hole. But that's quite different than, it was a big impact thing, but let's just move on and do something else. That's not what's happening. It's not what's happening with the reporters. And the reporters themselves who are so affected are certainly not going to let that happen.
Well,
which is good for democracy, and that's a good thing that it's good for democracy, because amongst all of that, we have a whole bunch of things that are bad for democracy that are also happening.
Yes, but then again, some things were good, some things were bad. Hitler did a lot of good things, for instance.
Yeah, so says Donald Trump, and as quoted in a new book. So here's just between now and
I didn't realize
the
he said that.
5-minute break we're going to have in 5 minutes, that is to say. The 2-minute break we're going to have in 5 minutes, or the 1-minute break we're going to have in 10 minutes.
The anniversary of the 1-minute break, yes.
Yeah. What's keeping democracy experts up most at night? An overturned election, says Benji Sarlin at NBC News.
Well.
Amid all the voting changes in state laws, giving more power to partisan officials to overturn an election is at the top of the list of concerns, and that's speaking with political scientists.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have this from David Rothkopf in the Daily Beast. "We still won't admit why so many people believe the big lie. 6 months after the insurrection it triggered, it's clear the stolen election nonsense is just a drop in a tidal wave of bullshit."
Oh, yes.
He talks about the fact that Americans are so enamored of lies anyway. It's easy to lie about this because we lie about everything to ourselves.
I guess that's true.
He sent this along and said, "I'm going to piss everybody off when I say this." But it's true. He says this is the problem. We as a society, and by we, I mean virtually all of us on the planet, are brought up to believe howling absurdities, ridiculous impossibilities, and insupportable malarkey from our very first moments on Earth. We have massive lie delivery systems that are the core institutions of society, and we've created cultural barriers to even questioning these fabrications, which are most deserving of skeptical scrutiny. For example, we regularly label as sacred those ideas that are at least able to stand up to scrutiny. We have folks in our society who can't even handle the idea that the history we teach our kids might actually be based on what happened, back in the past.
Right. Just throw it again this morning.
When we get to Nicole Hannah-Jones, which we'll do after the break, just keep that in mind.
Right.
Our parents lie to us. Our churches, synagogues, mosques lie to us. Our schools lie to us. Hollywood lies to us. Madison Avenue lies to us. The media lies to us. Our leaders lie. Our friends lie. They do. Going to the gym couldn't hurt, they tell you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, sometimes it does. What is more, the lies they offer are not always big lies. Like buying a particular brand of beer won't make you more attractive.
Oh, well.
And some are just gross oversimplifications. Like the founding fathers did a lot of good, but they weren't the figures carved out of marble. We were sold for years. Well, it's a lot more than that. Some of them were, pro-slavery, and some of them were pretty interesting people in their own way.
Yes.
But can you teach about that? Well, people get upset if you try to teach about that.
Right.
Some have a seed of truth within them, but are gross distortions, like Columbus did not discover America. And some of the time we invite the lies because they open the door to enjoyment, like all the bacon I can eat, I'm in.
Oh, what lie is that?
But one of the key reasons we buy into so many small lies is we've been force-fed so many big ones. I mean, really big ones. I mean, ones that make the current big lie look like one of those low-calorie snacks that's actually a high-calorie treat shrunk to a smaller size and repackaged.
No.
Right?
All right.
The original lies.
That's kind of weird. All right, yeah.
And so you have
what?
Mike Pompeo, for example, stepping out of this piece, tweeting this morning about, how dare people look at the Constitution and try to change it or argue about what it meant and stuff. It's a perfect document.
Yes, right. Especially the amendments that we love so much, like the Second Amendment.
Right. And, so Pompeo, to understand what he's doing here, besides just trying to run for president, is trying to treat the Constitution like it's the Bible.
Yes.
Like this is the word of the founders, and you can't change it, and you can't touch it, and how dare you criticize it?
Right. Unless
amendment process?
Right. Well, repeal Article 5, I always say. So, it's amazing that they would do that, and now they will treat it like the Bible. Probably cross the street and hold it up in a photo op in the middle of a protest.
Right. Yeah. The point being, if you lie about everything, what's another big lie?
I guess that's true, but then again, now what do I do? That's just nihilism. Well, we'll come back and complain about it after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. We continue with our morning roundup because there's so much news and so many days worth that we didn't get to.
Well, this is all leading up to something.
Just today's
so we'll see if I actually get there this week.
Overwhelming. Okay. Yes.
So my next piece I want to mention in the context of at the same time worrying about democracy but trying to rehab Hitler. We have Why Republicans Condemn Marjorie Taylor Greene but Not Paul Gosar by Ben Jacobs, which is in New York Magazine.
That's a good question.
In a divided country, almost everything is the subject of partisan debate, the food we eat, the sports we watch. However, traditionally, there remained one little bit of common ground. The Nazis were bad. But the actions of Congressman Paul Gosar in recent months have tested even that proposition.
Right. That's the problem. Okay.
First, the far-right Republican from Arizona was the much-touted surprise guest at a counter-CPAC event in February hosted by Nick Fuentes, a white nationalist who marched at the infamous neo-Nazi Charlottesville rally in 2017, where a neo-Nazi murdered a counter-protester. Gosar condemned neocon control in contrast to America First, and he was followed by Fuentes praising the Capitol riot as awesome and arguing that if the U.S. loses its white demographic core, then this is not America anymore. And then, last week, Gosar was revealed to be planning a campaign fundraiser with Fuentes, who has engaged, by the way, in Holocaust denialism, praised segregation, repeatedly made anti-Semitic comments. Gosar initially appeared to defend the fundraiser, and the next day on Capitol Hill, he played coy with reporters saying, I have no idea what's going on here.
Yeah.
And now they're not responding for comment about the invitation.
All right. Nick Fuentes,
Right.
coffee boy.
But as many have noticed, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy has yet to even chastise Gosar for his repeated associations with the extreme fringes. But Marjorie Taylor Greene, not so much. Now, she wasn't pulled off committees by McCarthy, but he did recently condemn her for comparing masked men dates to the Holocaust. And yesterday she talked about medical brown shirts, so she obviously hasn't learned anything from that. Marjorie's wrong, said McCarthy, and her intentional decision to compare the horrors of the Holocaust with wearing masks is appalling, said McCarthy in a statement, and it seemed to work for a while anyway. Shortly thereafter, Greene held a press conference to apologize for repeatedly making that comparison. Since the article was written, she's at it again. But Gosar hasn't even drawn a rebuke. And one reason for the quiet is that Republicans haven't been forced to play defense on Gosar like they have over Greene. While her comments drove news cycles and King became a national figure, Gosar flies under the radar of the national media, and part of this by chance. Gosar's first appearance with Fuentes was drowned out by the CPAC stage looking like a Nazi symbol conspiracy theory circulating on progressive Twitter. Right? I saw that. I was part of that. So this looks like a Nazi signal. Well, it turns out it was just coincidence. But, it got people upset because symbols get people upset. And it's also because, Ben Jacobs says, Democrats have remained relatively quiet. It's a more complicated case for Democrats to press than with Greene. Gosar is. As one Republican strategist noted, the issue with Gosar is about who he's associating with rather than what he's saying. So if that's the case, what do you do with Ilhan Omar?
I see, sort of.
It's not easy to do the two-step of educating why an association is unsavory, but it doesn't mean it's not worth trying. At the very least, it'd muddy the waters with Omar's comments. So that's what the Republicans think. The Democrats say it's the desire not to give the attention they crave to the white nationalists Gosar is associating with. You can spotlight hate and disinformation, but you don't want to, publicize it. And meanwhile, other Republicans on Capitol Hill have pleaded ignorance about Gosar.
Easy.
We don't know anything about it. I don't know what you're talking about.
I didn't read his tweet.
Yeah. And the only exception is anti-Trump maverick Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, who retweeted a condemnation of Gosar from a former Republican congressman. Okay. And while at the same time, the New York Times on July 5th, just 2 days ago, ran far-right extremist finds ally in an Arizona congressman, Representative Paul Gosar's association with the white nationalist Nick Fuentes is the most vivid example of the Republican Party's growing acceptance of extremism. So it's getting highlighted, and it's getting highlighted by some of the people who were at the January 6th insurrection. So, again, this stuff is not going to get swept under the rug. It's not going away. If Kevin McCarthy's play was to say, look, if we don't cooperate with the January 6th insurrection investigations, they'll stop, and that way we won't have to deal with it. Well, that's not happening.
Hopefully that won't work. No.
Right. Again, it won't work because the reporters were there, which is what I've been saying.
Yeah.
This one is from the Washington Post, and ramp up the 2022 midterms. Republican candidates center pitches on Trump's false election claims. And this is by Amy Gardner. It's in the Washington Post. And I guess the takeaway here that people have walked away from is that, a third of the Republican Party and of the nearly 700 Republicans who have filed initial paperwork, at least a third have embraced Trump's false claims about his defeat. Many of them, 136, are sitting members of Congress who voted against Joe Biden's Electoral College victory on January 6th. And of the nearly 600 state lawmakers who publicly embraced Trump's false claims, about 500 face re-election this year and next. Most of them signed legal briefs or resolutions challenging Biden's victory. At least 16 of them attended the January 6th protest in Washington. So this is of note. The growing roster of such candidates amounts to merely the latest step in that progression. So basically, the Republican Party is becoming the extremist party. All of the bloggers and the dirty effing hippies who said that this was going on with Trump, in fact, they're turning out to be correct again. And this is who the Republican Party is. Apologists like Byron York is saying, watch the Democrats try to claim that only the 1/3 of the party that are like this somehow represent the 2/3 that don't.
Yeah, well, first of all.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, give
because,
the 2/3 10 minutes.
This is who the Republican Party is.
Yeah.
This is Tom Edsall, Trump's cult of animosity shows no sign of letting up. That's from today. In 2016, Donald Trump recruited voters with the highest levels of animosity toward African Americans, assembling a Schadenfreude electorate, voters who take pleasure in making the opposition suffer, that continues to dominate the Republican Party even in the aftermath of the Trump presidency. With all his histrionics and theatrics, Trump brought the dark side of American politics to the fore, the alienated, the distrustful, voters willing to sacrifice democracy for a return to white hegemony. The segregation of segments of the electorate has been a permanent fixture of American politics, shifting between the two parties. For more than 2 decades, scholars and analysts have written about the growing partisan antipathy and polarization that have turned America into 2 warring camps. Liliana Mason, a political scientist at Johns Hopkins, makes the case via Twitter that Trump has served as a lightning rod for lots of regular people who hold white Christian supremacist beliefs. The solidification of their control over the party makes it seem like a partisan issue, but this faction's been around longer than our current partisan divide. In fact, they're not loyal to any party. They're loyal to white Christian domination. And that's why you find people saying, well, I'm more for Trump than I am for Republicans, which is what gets McCarthy and McConnell upset. They felt that they could control those folks, but, that's not how they vote. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they show up and turn out for Republicans down ballot either. If they're white Christian dominationists, dominionists, and if, who they really care about is Trump, that doesn't mean that that's transferable to anybody else. We've seen the non-transferable issue. Just because you like Obama doesn't mean you vote for Democrats. Just because you like Trump doesn't mean you vote for Republicans. Trump's success in transforming the party has radically changed the path to the Republican presidential nomination. The traditional elitist route through state and national party leaders, the Washington lobbying and interest group community, and top fundraisers across the country no longer assure success and may instead prove a liability for those seeking to emulate Trump. Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Ron DeSantis. The basic question is whether Trump's trajectory is replicable or whether there are unexplored avenues to victory for 2024 Republican National Convention seekers. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
So in other words, when Trump got into the race, he didn't have this clear coalition, but he's created it.
Yeah, I guess
right?
so.
And he notes, and another political scientist, Julie Wronski, University of Mississippi, put it this way: the Trump coalition is motivated by animosity toward blacks, Hispanics, Muslims, and LGBT. This animosity has no bearing on support for any of the other GOP elites or the party. Warmth toward whites and Christians equally predicts support for Trump, other GOP elites, and the party itself. The only area where Trump support is different than other GOP support is regard to harnessing this outgroup animus. So the animosity coalition will define the party as long as Trump remains the standard bearer. So if anybody like Lindsey Graham says, well, Trump's the leader of our party, what he's really saying is that for the white nationalists and for the Christian Dominion folks, he's our guy, and we need you to win, so vote for us. So that's what a lot of this is about. And it's that background, or if you want to put it differently, with all of that going on, why haven't all those folks who wrote about how support for Trump was based on economic anxiety gone back and rewritten their ridiculous, stupid pieces? Because it wasn't economic anxiety.
Yeah. Good question. And that actually makes me think of what we were discussing earlier about the number of reporters who were in the building during the insurrection. They're personally not letting the story go, but of course, I don't know what kind of fuss, if any, they have any opportunity to put up a fuss in the newsroom as they continue to run news stories, more or less uncritical news stories, that there are giant swaths of the Republican Party that are actually taking the tack that either it wasn't an insurrection, or even if it was, still a good thing. I don't know that reporters have any actual sway over things like that, but you kind of wish they did. I'm sure they wish they did too.
That's a great segue into the Nicole Hannah-Jones story.
Oh, okay.
But
terrific.
I have to point out that I've been talking for the last 40 minutes about things reporters have told us.
Yes.
So they are getting these stories into the news.
It's not that they're not. It's not that they're being shut out. It's that they should be. You wish they were able to shut out the rest of it.
Right. Well,
I don't think
Fox
they
News
are.
doesn't cover it the way we do.
Well, no.
And a lot of people listen to Fox News and nothing else.
Yes.
And of course, Facebook, poisons the entire environment because they do the big lies.
Yes.
But here's a fellow, Joe Killian,
All right.
who talks about a reporter himself.
Okay.
Talks about recent events with Nicole Hannah-Jones. Nicole Hannah-Jones, for those of you who don't know, is an American journalist, a very skilled one, Peabody winner, Pulitzer winner, put together the 1619 Project for the New York Times, and then was recruited by University of North Carolina, where she's an alum, to fill a seat in their journalism school, a night position, KNIGHT. And so she's recruited for this, hired, and UNC Board of Trustees, not the dean of the school, not the faculty, but the Board of Trustees. Okay. So analogous, if you will, to what you were just talking about. It's not the reporters, it's the publishers and editors. So the publisher, in this case, happens to be a fellow named Walter Hussman, conservative Arkansas media magnate and UNC mega donor, who didn't want her to get tenure. So he talks to the board inappropriately. Donors aren't supposed to do stuff like this, but of course they do. But this is like egregious even beyond that. And he talks the board into not offering her tenure. The school gets upset, the school who recruited her. The faculty get upset, the students get upset. There's a backlash. And so finally, last week, she was offered tenure. And yesterday, she announced that she and Ta-Nehisi Coates, in fact, are going to take positions at Howard University.
Yes.
Very well-funded positions.
Well, all right.
Large, major visibility positions.
Yes.
And thanks, but no thanks. I don't need to go where I'm not wanted.
Yeah.
So that happens yesterday. And this is Joe Killian talking about this. Meeting with Nicole Hannah-Jones for an interview this week made me reflect on my June interview with Walter Hussman, the conservative Arkansas media magnate and UNC megadonor who lobbied against hiring her. It's worth talking a bit about these two people in interviews. When I interviewed Hussman last month, he projected an intense folksiness, sort of Mr. Rogers meets Bill Clinton. And given Hussman's history with the Clintons in Arkansas, you might not love that comparison, but it's apt.
Yeah, very true. Okay.
A part of this was Hussman saying to me repeatedly, well, Joe, you and I are both reporters, or, well, since you're both journalists, I think you understand. And this is a common rhetorical device. Find an area of common ground, assert affinity, create a bond. Reporters, including yours truly, employ this in our work all the time. If I find out someone's from the part of eastern North Carolina where I was born, if they have a connection to the military, went to my college, I know we have a point of common reference. And as we do it all the time, reporters notice when it's done to us, particularly by politicians and PR people. A lot of people worked in a newsroom for a year or two in their 20s before figuring out they could buy things with money. So there's a lot of, I was a reporter.
Okay.
Walter Hussman can legitimately say that to people with a few important asterisks. After journalism and business school, Hussman was briefly a reporter before, at age 27, he was made publisher of a paper in the family media dynasty he would go on to inherit.
Oh, I see. All right.
When I was 27 years old, I was a beat reporter on a daily newspaper going to fires, murder scenes, protests, government meetings. I practically slept in the newsroom, which was much nicer than my apartment, and took side gigs to afford to sleep indoors and eat while reporting. Now, that sort of experience, slowly clawing your way up from smaller to larger newsrooms, being mentored by veteran reporters, slowly earning bigger beats and more responsibility over many years, is what I'm supposed to assume I share with somebody who says I was a reporter.
Yes. Well, sure. I remember the trick. Sure. Mitt
we're
Romney
the
was
same.
poor when he went to college or something, yada, yada.
I mean, Tucker Carlson worked his way up by inheriting a fortune.
Right. Donald Trump took out a loan from his father.
Yeah. Blew it,
Small
but got
loan
another
of
one.
$1 million.
Those are, as it happens, experiences I do share with Nicole Hannah-Jones. As a black woman, she had to work longer and harder than I did to get ahead in newsrooms with more grit, more talent. She's earned much more success, but we both worked our way up from working class roots. Neither of us were, in our mid-20s, handed news outlets by our families, Neither of us were allowed to lose enormous amounts of money in years-long, heavily political newspaper wars until we crushed our rivals, assumed dominance, and expanded our intergenerational empires.
Well, I was, but okay.
Yeah, well, I was, but maybe not you, right? I suspect that this may be one of the things that most offended Hannah Jones about Husband questioning her media values and credentials, whether she was fit to teach young journalists. And my interview with her confirmed it. Husband didn't work his way from the Chapel Hill News to the New York Times. His reporting and writing haven't earned him Peabody, Polk, Pulitzer, and National Magazine awards. His name isn't on UNC Chapel Hill's journalism school because of his staggering reporting achievements. Understanding,
true.
as he must, the difference between his CV and that of Nicole Hannah Jones, he still felt the need to tell Susan King, dean of the J School and UNC Chapel Hill, he was against her hire. King said thanks for the input, but the J School would make the decision. Did Husband respect the decision, leave the issue to the stellar J School faculty? No, he did not. He contacted the chancellor. He contacted the vice chancellor in charge of financial giving. He contacted at least one member of the board of trustees. As students, faculty, and even members of the board of trustees have noted, this was enormously inappropriate. Strictly speaking, Husband shouldn't even have known the school was pursuing her. His $25 million donation to the school gave him information and access few alumni and alumni enjoy.
Insider
So using
trading
that
of
privileged
sorts.
position, Husband weighed in on a potential hire at UNC repeatedly and at levels to which even other prominent alumni don't have access. It shocked not just students and faculty at the school, but even other well-connected, well-heeled donors. When Husband didn't get what he wanted, assent from the dean of the J School, the school offered to set up a meeting between Husband and Hannah Jones. And Hannah Jones told me she declined. Having accomplished so much in journalism, Hannah Jones didn't feel inclined to kiss the ring of a wealthy white scion who thought his money brought him special access and input into the faculty recruiting process. Now, I don't know many real reporters who'd blame her. With Hannah Jones now on her way to Howard to create the new Center for Journalism and Democracy, I find myself looking at all that happened here, how it happened, and thinking not just about journalism, but about boxing.
Boxing. Interesting.
Stay with me here, he says. Learning to
We'll
box
have
as a
to.
teenager, I was taught some lessons that have stood me in good stead. Call them core values if you must. One of them is the more you sweat, the less you bleed. In boxing, putting in the work before a fight prepares you for what's coming. In journalism, reporting and writing stories big and small, sometimes 2 or more a day for years, prepares you to cover anything. And whatever you may think of her, it's impossible to credibly argue Hannah Jones hasn't put in the work. As a veteran of newspaper newsrooms, I assure you black women still have to work twice as hard for half as much success. To have the success she's had, just imagine the work. So this fight, having to prove to conservative white men that she, a black woman who has won a Peabody, Polk, and Pulitzer, is fit to teach journalism to teenagers, she was ready for it. In the end, she got what most faculty, staff, and alumni agreed she deserved, a public up or down vote on whether she should, like all her Knight chair predecessors, who are white, by the way, be offered tenure. That she won't be accepting the offer says more about UNC than it does her. In our interview, Hannah Jones made it clear the silence and lack of transparency from school leadership made taking another offer inevitable. They could have prevented this had they put in the work. The more you sweat, the less you bleed. So I thought that was a pretty nice summary of what happened here. And again, it's in the context of what we started talking about at the beginning of the show. There's a lot going on here in America that puts democracy at a knife's edge, and there's a lot of threats to what's going on here, a lot of it based on racial animosity. And the idea that this dude didn't want Nicole Hannah Jones teaching journalism students how to cover these issues, and therefore used his money to try to get her kicked out and got what he wanted in the end.
Yes.
Is despicable. But
Yes.
it's all part of the same pattern here. What is it that they didn't want Nicole Hannah Jones teaching the kids? All the stuff we just talked about for the last 45 minutes.
That's true.
That's what they don't want her teaching.
Yes. And so, I guess that backfires in a way. Now it's headline news that white people with money can intervene and undo all of the work that's done by the rules, by the books elsewhere, by lesser folks who weren't handed $1 million media empires by their families.
Did you think that critical race theory objections were a real thing? Do you think cancel culture is a real thing? Look at it in the context of what we just talked about. No, it's not. It's really just an attempt to silence folks like Nicole Hannah-Jones. And by the way, Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah. How did he enter into it? He's also moving to
He
Howard,
was offered
right?
in residence a very high position at Howard on the same day. So basically, they announced they got two MacArthur superstars to come and talk about how to teach kids how to do journalism and how to write. And they'll be there together, and they've appeared together. And, it's part of trying to build something at Howard that UNC could have had, but didn't. So that's where his name comes into it.
It's kind of an amazing thing, I guess. So congratulations to this guy who wanted to quietly put the kibosh on this thing, turning it into such a big story that Ta-Nehisi Coates being landed at Howard University is second-tier news for the day from Howard. I mean, it's not even the biggest story at Howard University. That's pretty astonishing.
Right. So Dan Dresner writes, Nicole Hannah-Jones lives every thwarted academic's dream. Many academics have revenge fantasies. Hannah-Jones has managed to make hers a reality.
All right. Cool. That works.
Right. New York Times journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones is not a conventional academic. She doesn't have a Ph.D.
Right.
She does have a master's in journalism, as well as a Pulitzer, Peabody, and Polk, and a MacArthur Fellowship.
Does she? Yeah. I mean,
and her last big endeavor for the New York Times 1619 Project generated a lot of controversy, but also fruitful engagement between historians. All of this makes her eminently qualified to be a professor of journalism.
All right.
Now, last year, she got this offer from UNC for a night chair in its Sussman School of Journalism and Media, and such chairs normally come with tenure. They do if you're white. Hannah-Jones agreed to the offer. Remember, she was recruited. She didn't apply. They went after her. And then a curious thing happened. In Hannah-Jones' own words, my tenure package was then submitted to the university's promotion and tenure committee, which also overwhelmingly approved my application. My tenure package was presented for a vote by the board of trustees so I could start teaching. The day of the trustees meeting, we waited for word but heard nothing. The next day, we learned that my tenure application had been pulled, but received no explanation as to why. The same thing happened again in January. Both the university's chancellor and provost refused to fully explain why it had failed twice to come to a vote or what transpired, and the rest of the story has been well documented in the press.
All right.
Right? And it's at this point where Hannah-Jones managed to live out every academic's revenge fantasy rather than go to a place where those in charge were willing to tolerate her. She demonstrated some serious agency. She released a statement that included the following: every night chair at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill since the 80s has entered that position as full professor with tenure, yet the vote on my tenure had to be forced by weeks of protest, scathing letters of reprimand, the threat of legal action, and my refusal to start July 1st without it. Even then, the Board of Trustees had to be led to this vote by its youngest member, Lamar Richards, the student body president, who publicly demanded a special meeting. The board then chose to wait to vote until the last possible day, the last possible moment. If I had any doubts about whether I should come to UNC or not, watching the proceedings affirmed my decision. At some point, when you've proven yourself and fought your way into institutions that were not built for you, when you've proven you can compete and excel at the highest level, you have to decide that you are done forcing yourself in. Now, she'll still be a night chair at Howard. Okay. Furthermore, acclaimed author and journalist Ta-Nehisi Coates will be joining her at Howard. Hannah-Jones will also create and run the Center for Journalism and Democracy. The center will focus on training and supporting aspiring journalists and acquiring the investigative skills and historical and analytical expertise needed to cover the crisis our democracy is facing. And so that's like a big deal. That and Dresner goes on to say the fallout of Hannah-Jones' decision, as well as those of the UNC Board of Trustees, are pretty serious. As my Washington Post colleagues Lauren Lumpkin and Nick Anderson note, the twin hires represent an extraordinary coup for Howard. Howard's gone a long way toward creating a center for excellence that will make the school far more capable at recruiting students and top-tier faculty away from places like UNC Chapel Hill. And then the Hussman School faculty supports Hannah-Jones in her decision. And in taking her talents to Howard, Hannah-Jones offers a cautionary warning to higher education officials across the country about what happens if you let politics interfere with your hiring decisions. And by the way, I would also add with your teaching decisions, like trying to monitor what you're teaching in the classroom. That's why this piece and this story is so important and has so many different ramifications. I mean, look at it at every level you want to, whether it's a qualified black woman, whether it's women in the faculty, whether it's the chilling effect of attempting to control what's taught in the classroom, you name it. You know, David versus Goliath. rich white dudes trying to get their way. There's just so many different aspects of the story that are important. And it all goes back to what is it that they don't want her to teach? Hence the whole discussion about the democracy on a knife's edge.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the thing you mentioned now this morning, I don't really follow Matt Walsh, but a lot of people love to yell about how terrible he is, and they're right. He now joining with a number of other conservatives I've seen in the last couple of days saying they should put cameras in every schoolroom so that parents can monitor and make sure that teachers aren't teaching critical race theory. The thing that's
I think
not
he said
happening.
that because Tucker Carlson said that last night.
Yes, that's right. So he's the other. I mean, I've heard it before. It's actually a meme that's a couple of weeks old, I guess, since the explosion of local school board meetings about this topic. But it's really just astonishing. It just struck me, of course, as like, well, I don't know, 10 minutes ago we were supposed to put a gun in every classroom in case somebody came in shooting. Now we're going to have cameras in every classroom in case someone ever decides to teach critical race theory, which they're not doing now, but might decide to do later, but something. And I don't know, just kind of astonishing. It's amazing how much money we have for cameras and guns, but teachers still have to buy pencils for their kids.
Well, again, the reason all of this is so dangerous is because they're losing the argument and they're getting upset about it and starting to take extreme measures.
Well,
how pervasive is this issue? Well, let me just bring up something that just happened. Tulane School of Medicine was placed on probation by the accrediting body amid allegations of racism and lack of diversity. That is a big deal. If they don't fix it by the time of their next survey, they get disaccredited. And so the doctors who graduate are from a non-accredited university.
Well, that's pretty extraordinary for a number of reasons. I didn't even realize that was one of the reasons that they would threaten a school's accreditation. That's something brand new. And
we'll talk about that tomorrow. But,
okay.
Again, this is the whole big picture here that we're trying to look at here. And that's the kind of stuff they don't want Nicole Hannah-Jones teaching.
Well, that is a big picture. Thanks, Greg. We'll catch up more tomorrow. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio as Greg makes his hasty exit. There's not enough time in a full hour to get all of these stories in, but we'll be back with them tomorrow. And it's often the case that we can't fit everything in, but everything stayed kind of quiet today. Was it not garbage collection day? I didn't hear Abby in the background. Maybe she was contented. Or maybe she was on summer vacation. There's a recess for dogs. Maybe that's what's going on. Anyway, plenty to catch up on beyond all this. I'm astonished by the story from Tulane. I really had no idea that you could be put on, you could actually have your accreditation revoked on such grounds. But I guess things must be really alarmingly out of whack for them to even approach it's like a death sentence for a medical school, quite honestly. So that's pretty amazing and an astonishing development all by itself. One of many, I guess. Let's see, other things to round up and get to today. I want to see what else did I even put in. I can't even remember what's been in Pocket over the last day or so because there's so many amazing things. Let's see. I'm just going to run through them, I guess, more or less in the order that I put them in Pocket and check in on some of these things. Total shift from the storyline we were talking about over the past hour, though I'm sure we'll return to it. And now I'm thinking of other segues to get right back to it anyway. But first of all, I grabbed this story from The Hill, the story being political electoral in nature rather than procedural or policymaking. But something I hadn't really anticipated, but I'm taking, I guess, some curious joy in here. Senator Lankford from Oklahoma, apparently, in the focus here. Lankford on GOP chairman supporting his primary opponent and saying that it's unheard of. I guess it's sort of I guess we'll point and laugh and enjoy the schadenfreude of it all. But Senator James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, in case you don't know where he's from. I mean, he's one of the lesser-known members of the Senate, really, responded to his state Republican chairman's support, state Republican Party chairman is what we're talking about here, supporting his Senate primary challenger, calling the move unheard of. And for the most part, it really is. And I gather there aren't that many of you who have been following that situation. And, you know, we haven't certainly paid a lot of attention to Jim Lankford's re-election bid. And I guess if you asked me to opine on it without having done any research on it, I would have thought, I don't know. It hasn't entered the radar, probably because everybody's thinking it's a pretty Republican state. He's running for re-election. He's probably in a pretty safe seat. But then I'm reminded that he hasn't been sufficiently pro-Trump, and in fact had stated his offense at having been targeted as an elected member of Congress in the January 6th insurrection, and that's how he finds himself on the outs. It's sort of an indicator of where they're going. I mean, we all knew that the Republican Party was going to land there, and we've talked quite a bit about how much time they've spent moving there. But here we are. So, as we said, the state Republican Party chair supports his primary challenger. It's more unheard of than it is rare, Lankford told the Tulsa World on Sunday when they asked him about it. I'd say it's highly unusual for a state party chair in any state in America to come out and say, I'm not going to at least be neutral. That's true, and usually it's enough to read the announcement of the neutrality of the chair as being, well, okay, that's a pretty good indicator of he's really for the other person here, but feels obligated by his position as state party chair not to say so. Well, now they abandon all of that because, you know, all the rules, all the norms out the window, et cetera, et cetera. The incumbent senator noted that the state party is the ultimate decision maker, but added, every state party chairman I've ever talked to has, at a minimum, it's always just remained neutral. That's the nature of every leader of every party, by the way, Republican or Democrat, Lankford said, which is something that he ought to, you know, ponder for a little while. Maybe the Republican Party is, in fact, just what am I going to say here? Is a political party at this point in name only. Or they're a very different kind of political party, more like the political wing of extremist/terrorist organizations that we see overseas in various settings. Think about that. It's the nature of every leader in every party, Republican or Democrat, to stay neutral in those things, except in your case. So what do you think's going on in your party, in your case? I'm sure we'll get no answer about that. And instead, he'll be pondering, well, how can I make the transition from where I am to being sufficiently Trump-loving that I get to secure my position in the Senate again so that I can be independent and exercise my independent judgment on behalf of my constituents and fellow Oklahomans. I'm sure they don't say Oklahomans, but I guess, they refer to themselves instead as, what do Oklahomans call themselves these days? Are they the Sooners? Like the college mascot name, I guess so. That comes from, you know, them referring to themselves that way all the time. It's not the college first, in other words. Anyway, I recognize that much. The development comes after the state. The development comes along with the arrival of the lawnmower outside the window as well. It was the weed whacker before, so I should have anticipated this. But okay, we'll talk right over it. Because one of the things we can't do is we don't have enough money, power, and influence here, like that guy from the University of North Carolina, to tell them to mow the lawn outside of show times during the week. And this happened 100 times before, but just that much more irritating today. Maybe because we had to start off the day with learning that there was a president of the United States that thought Hitler wasn't so bad. Anyway, the development comes after the state Republican Party chairman John Bennett announced his support for Lankford's primary challenger. Now we'll find out who that person is. A person by the name of Jackson I guess Lahmeyer. I have no idea how you pronounce it. Lahmeyer. 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 I have no idea, and I hope never to find out. Not that I want to see Langford reelected either, but I just want them both to, fall in a well or something, and nobody knows what to do except for vote for the Democrats. Somehow that will be the outcome. Not in Oklahoma. They'd probably just elect the well, I guess. Or if somebody nominates a gun for Senate, I suppose the gun will win. Bennett has said that he is backing Lahmeyer in an individual capacity, not as head of the state party. So he is aware of how awkward and unusual this is. He's just doing it anyway. And I guess trying to hang on to his position as Republican state party chair by saying, well, I'm not endorsing him as state party chair. I'm endorsing him as the person occupying the seat. He's like going to be a sovereign citizen, separating himself from his corporate identity as state party chair. I mean, it doesn't make any difference, and you can't do that, and it doesn't work, but he says he's going to do it anyway so that no one throws him out of power, which is ironic given what it is that Langford is complaining about. He also doesn't want to be thrown out of power, even though he'll do anything to retain that power, including giving it all away to someone else. Just so long as he gets to put his name on the list saying that he's a senator and collect the salary, I guess. Anyway, so where were we with this? Right. The Republican chair, John Bennett, I guess, telling the newspapers, I'm here for one reason only, and that is to do the job that the people elected me to do, and that is to stand and fight for our constitutional republic and to get rid of those that refuse to do it, Bennett told the Oklahoman. Of course, again, the job he's talking about is not as a public elected official. He is head of the Republican Party in Oklahoma and has convinced himself that the job is to stand and fight for our constitutional republic, which it really isn't. And if it was, he wouldn't be Republican Party chairman. But okay. Bennett cited Langford's move. This is the real problem. So what's at the root of Langford's problem with his fellow Republicans in Oklahoma? Bennett cited Langford's move not to object to the certification of the 2020 election results in the hours after a pro-Trump mob stormed the Capitol. Langford originally said days before the attack that he would oppose the Electoral College vote due to claims of voting irregularities. And Lahmeyer, her guy, has, of course, criticized Langford for that move, saying the senator caved like an absolute coward, according to USA Today. Of course, the rest of us thought, oh, what an actual reasoned position. He was all set to, do Trump's bidding, but then Trump sent people to storm the Capitol and threaten the life, at least of the vice president, his vice president. Not to mention everybody else, exposing them to a frenzied mob. Who knows what they were going to do? And Langford's response to that is, gosh, that's unacceptable. And I don't think I'm going to participate anymore in the stunt that they had planned, because clearly they had more planned than just the stunt. And quite honestly, it's a pretty good assessment of things to say, well, they don't need me to pull this procedural stunt on the floor of the Senate anymore. That's not going to do anything. There aren't going to be enough votes to do what they want to do. So, I think they have probably satisfied themselves with the violence that they've staged in its place. And I no longer really have to do this thing. But as it turns out, they wanted that stupid stunt too. So that's where we are. Everybody anticipated it. I guess we didn't anticipate that it would happen in Oklahoma, only because we didn't give any thought to Oklahoma at all. Not because of Oklahoma being Oklahoma, but because it's generally a foregone conclusion that Republicans will win the Senate races there. Although, in theory, we should have been thinking about this all the time, because, of course, we're always saying, for instance, that where Democrats have safe seats, we ought to be looking for more and better Democrats. But from the Republican point of view, if they're looking for more and better Republicans, what passes for, this is, I guess, the point of the story. What passes for a better Republican among the Republican base these days are crazy people who supported the insurrection and who will do anything, literally anything, to reinstall Donald Trump as president, no matter what the law requires, what the Constitution requires. And while you're doing it, to say that you're doing it to safeguard and fight for our constitutional republic, even though what you really mean is, by what I mean, I guess we could say, Bennett says, for standing and fighting for our constitutional republic is backing candidates who will be willing to overthrow it at the drop of a MAGA hat. That's what I mean about protecting the constitutional republic. And Jim Langford said, oh, I'm not so sure that sending a violent mob to the Capitol to overthrow our constitutional order is the best way of protecting the constitutional republic. And Bennett, who's been elected to no public service position whatsoever that I'm aware of, says, no, I know better than that. So there you go. That's kind of where we'll leave it for the now. So Jackson Lammeyer, or whatever his name is, says that Langford was a coward for changing his vote, and the comments echo claims by you-know-who, former President Trump, who has continued to maintain that the 2020 election was rigged. There is no evidence that widespread voter fraud took place during the presidential election. They note in the final line of this story of a senator facing a serious primary challenge because the challenger and the state Republican Party chair believe the exact opposite. So there you go. I just thought I would take note of that. Speaking of people who believe this, and the 1/3, they say, of the Republican Party who believes it, and lots of people getting angry. Well, what about the 2/3 that don't? 1/3 of the Republican Party admits it to pollsters. 2/3 of the Republican Party probably actually believes it. I would say they've got the numbers backwards there if they could get inside people's heads, but those are the numbers we have available to us. They're not able to crack into people's skulls and figure these things out. So what sort of people are we talking about with this 1/3 business? I happen to notice in the roundup of stories that Greg provided via Skype, one of them was a photo of a Virginia politician, which raised an eyebrow for me. And this was, I think, the story that was reporting the 1/3 figure. The headline here in the Washington Post: in ramp up to 2022 midterms, Republican candidates center pitches on Trump's false election claims. The story is illustrated with a photo of a Republican candidate, but not a Republican candidate for Congress, rather a Republican, although maybe he's now moving on to run for Congress. He is currently a member of, I think, the Virginia House of Delegates, our state legislature. Ren Williams. Ren, like the bird, Williams. And the caption of the photo tells us Ren Williams defeated a 14-year incumbent in a Virginia House of Delegates primary after claiming he had seen evidence of fraud while working as a lawyer for the Trump campaign. Now, that by itself, of course, is a very open-ended statement. Like, for instance, I have no doubt that anybody who was working as a lawyer for the Trump campaign would have seen evidence of fraud. What we're meant to take away from that, and you can tell by the defiant way in which Mr. Wren has crossed his arms in front of him, and taking this defiant stance, we're supposed to think that that means that he had seen evidence of voter fraud on behalf of Joe Biden, which then allowed him to claim victory. But, it doesn't specify what sort of fraud he saw while working as a lawyer for the Trump campaign. So the door is open to proving the exact opposite, for instance. Anyway, it's interesting because I scanned this article when Greg had mentioned it. It was the Amy Gardner article in the Post, and I didn't see anywhere like what is exactly the current status of Ren Williams and who was the 14-year incumbent that he defeated. Now, we're in the middle of our elections now. Virginia, of course, has the off-year elections. So I don't think I don't think Ren Williams is currently running for Congress, although who knows what his situation is. But rather that he had defeated a 14-year incumbent Republican for this 2021 general election, and will be, if successful, a member of the House of Delegates, not a member of Congress. And I think a lot of the stories that were focusing on the number of Republicans who were centering Trump's baseless conspiracy theory fraud claims were in fact running for national office. But they are running for office all over the place. And it's just as important when they're running for state level, because of course it's in the state legislatures where they're passing these ridiculous laws that will allow Republicans to change the results of elections that they don't like after the fact. The one thing that they were denied in this insurrection, in this insurgency, I'd like to change the word that we use for that, and even the supposed heroes of principle like Georgia Secretary of State, Raffensperger, right? Am I remembering the name correctly? He, too, was really only leaning on legal technicalities, it seems. The current state of the law in Georgia doesn't allow me to do the things you're asking me to do, Mr. President. But if the law were changed such that it was just arbitrarily put within my power to make a different vote total be the reality by snapping my fingers and declaring it to be the case, then I would. That's the real danger. That's the worry that Greg mentioned at the top of his segment, that this is what keeps people up at night. All right, so let me read a little bit about this one because I'm interested in this guy here. A candidate to be Arizona's top elections official said recently he hopes to review a review of 2020 ballots underway, the fraud it. They won't, say it right up front. Will lead to a reversal of former President Donald Trump's defeat there. This is sort of the top-level roundup of all this stuff. In Georgia, a member of Congress who used to focus primarily on culturally conservative causes, such as opposing same-sex marriage, has made Trump's false claim that the election was stolen a central element of his bid to try to unseat the current Secretary of State. That would be Jody Hice going after Raffensperger. And Raffensperger trying to save himself by saying, yeah, I would steal the election for you next time if you just change the law and make me less uncomfortable about it. And in Virginia last month, here we are, a political novice who joined Trump's legal team to try to overturn his 2020 loss in court mounted a fierce primary challenge and won after attacking a Republican state House member who said he had seen no evidence of widespread fraud in the election, which is, of course, like I said, the final line of the Hill piece that I just read about Lankford, because there is no evidence of widespread fraud in the election, as everybody keeps saying. But Ren Williams runs and says, no, I saw evidence of fraud. Not of what kind of fraud, or maybe we'll find out a little bit more detail about this as we read on. But of course, I also remind you, and he should know as a lawyer, that evidence is not proof. Evidence tends to prove something, but by itself doesn't always actually prove it. And seeing evidence of fraud, I mean, who knows what that means? In Arizona, they think I found a bamboo fiber is evidence and therefore proof of fraud. And it isn't either one. So you never know what he means. Let's find out what he's talking about. Ren Williams saying about his opponent, who doesn't get named here, he wasn't doing anything. Squat, diddly. That's legal terms, squat and diddly. Williams said in an interview about his primary opponent, he wasn't taking election integrity seriously. I'm sitting here fighting for election integrity in the courts, and he's my elected representative who can legislate, and he's not. Except, of course, he's not in the majority, and so there wasn't really much he was going to be able to do practically. But I guess he says he's thinking he should have at least introduced legislation that would have failed to prove a thing that didn't happen. That would have been a great use of his time. Across the country, as campaigns gear up for a handful of key races this year and the pivotal 2020 midterms, Republican candidates for state and federal offices are increasingly focused on the last election, which, by the way, isn't that a great lesson for all of us? I think we're always taught you want to keep up with the times. You don't want to always be refighting the last war or relitigating the last case. However, that is now a central tenet of the new Republican platform. Look backwards, not forwards. Although that's really kind of always been the Republican platform in a sense, so I guess it's not that big of a change. Anyway, so as I said, across the country, Republican candidates for state and federal office are increasingly focused on the last election, running on the falsehood spread by Trump and his allies that the 2020 race was stolen from him. And remember that his assertion is that it was stolen from him, not from Republicans, not that all the Republicans who ran for office deserve to be in office because obviously their elections were stolen too. Just his. And it is kind of an amazing thing when you think about it, that he's got a whole party convinced that, one, an election was stolen when it wasn't, and that, two, it was just his. All the other people who fought and bled on the front lines fighting to uphold our constitutional republic, but who lost, well, you're just SOL. Sorry. I mean, you lost, whatever, sorry, we can't help you. But the point is, I lost. And you people who are going to run next time need to realize this. I mean, I don't know how he did it, but apparently he's got a weird kind of charm and can persuade people to believe these things. All right, that's what makes him dangerous. Anyway, while most of these campaigns are in their early stages, the article continues, the embrace of Trump's claims is already widespread on the trail and in candidates' messages to voters. The trend provides fresh evidence of Trump's continued grip on the GOP, reflecting how a movement inspired by his claims and centered on overturning a Democratic election has gained currency in the party since the January 6th Capitol attack. Dozens of candidates promoting the baseless notion that the election was rigged are seeking powerful statewide offices, such as governor, attorney general, and secretary of state, which would give them authority over the administration of elections in several of the decisive states where Trump and his allies sought to overturn the outcome and engineer his return to the White House. Anyway, I guess since we were talking so much about journalism and journalism culture, I just, here I am blaming victims and all of this sometimes by saying, well, maybe they should be doing more to push in newsrooms. And I don't know what's possible and what's not, but it's a constant frustration that we see this. As I'm reading dozens of candidates promoting the baseless notion that elections were rigged, I mean, it's nice that it's in there, baseless notion, et cetera, and you get to thinking, well, what else could they really be doing? They have to report the facts of what's going on, and at least they put this explanation in there. But every time this comes up, for some reason, my mind wanders to the fact that you're really talking about total lunatics running for public office. Like if you really believe that it's a baseless notion that the elections are rigged, and I do, and I think you do too, and I think these reporters do, well then you're talking about someone who's a total lunatic. They might have some grounded beliefs in something else, but for the most part, on stuff that matters, like in terms of are you fit to even be considered a serious candidate for office, they project total lunatic as the overall picture. And I'm thinking, well, what power have these reporters in these publications really got to dismiss people who are obvious total lunatics right up front and simply write them off in terms of coverage of the election? Sure, I mean, it's fact that they're running, but does it really mean they need to get that kind of attention? Well, the fact that they're running as Republican candidates still, in the minds of these reporters and editors and publishers, means that they're, yes, entitled to automatic attention. Now, on the other hand, I will say, gee whiz, I know so many reporters who are really very adept at, say, dismissing the presidential candidacy of Vermin Supreme year after year. How is it that they're able to just come to that conclusion? Is it really just the boot on the head? Well, maybe. I mean, that's a pretty good indicator. But you're still talking about people, they claim to be Republicans. They claim to be seeking the mantle of a major party in this country, but they're starting out from a premise, a central tenet. The reason they declared their candidacy in the first place is absolute insanity on its face. But we still can't find a way to make them kind of, sort of, even remotely a little bit like the guy with the boot on his head, and just ignore them, because both sides, you gotta cover the Republicans, because, I don't know, they're one of the two letters that you have to pay attention to. Now, if they're an I, then you can ignore them if you want to. But if it's an R or a D, you just gotta pay attention. We have no choice.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. kagrox@gmail.com.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Right back into the story where we left off. Thinking ahead already to what comes next. But, why have we lost sight of this Washington Post story for some reason? Did we, I don't know, somehow backed out of it and ended up in closing it. But let's see if we can't find it again. Yes, that's right. It was from the Skype feed. That's why it's over here instead of the Pocket feed, which would have put it on this side of the screen. Wondering a little bit about the power of the news media to dismiss cranks and lunatics and why it's somehow missing here now. I guess you don't want necessarily for there to end up the situation. I guess if there's a serious chance that they might win the primary and then end up as one of the two candidates, and they might even win that district, you kind of have to cover it. You don't want it to show up as a surprise for everybody. Surprise, that guy we didn't tell you about actually won, and now you know nothing about this guy. But still, again, I don't know. Somehow, maybe if the headline was local crackpot wins Republican nomination, party becomes joke, might be a better or more descriptive headline, but they're afraid to do that because we'll offend Republicans, and you might, I guess, and you may or may not actually affect the outcome of the race as well. I don't know. So it's a bit of a balancing act. What do you get out of it if you go ahead and do that? I don't know, but you might also convince people not to vote for the guy, or for Republicans who are hoping to reclaim the integrity of the party to realize, no, we're going to have to move on and reorganize somewhere else instead. All right, where were we with this? One, we had noted how many candidates across the country running on the big lie as a central central tenet of their campaign, the reason they were running in the first place. Many, the article continues, are newcomers to politics. Not surprising, of course. They boast campaign websites proclaiming America first, call themselves patriots, or tout their military service. Easy, knee-jerk stuff to do. Some, including Chuck Gray of Wyoming, declare, quote, election integrity as their top priority. Gray is one of at least 6 pro-Trump Republicans challenging Representative Liz Cheney, who has denounced Trump and voted to impeach him on a charge that he incited the Capitol attack, which he did. And many are current Republican office holders lining up to seek re-election, who have backed Trump's efforts over the past 8 months by questioning the validity of the 2020 result, but just for him, taking legislative votes or signing on to official efforts to overturn it. Of the nearly 700 Republicans who have filed initial paperwork with the Federal Election Commission to run next year either for U.S. Senate or U.S. House of Representatives, at least one-third have embraced Trump's false claims about his defeat. Now, I would suggest that if you expanded that to all those who have filed to run for state or local office who do the same, I suggest you would find that it's much more than one-third of the Republican Party. It is closer to two-thirds after all. Many of them, they note, and as Greg reported earlier, 136 of them are sitting members of Congress who voted against Joe Biden's electoral victory on January 6th. Similarly, of the nearly 600 state lawmakers who publicly embraced Trump's false claims, about 500 face re-election this year or next. Most of them signed legal briefs or resolutions challenging Biden's victory. At least 16 of them actually attended the January 6th insurgency, I'll say, in Washington. What's really frightening now is the extent of the effort to steal power over future elections, said Jenna Griswold, the Democratic Secretary of State in Colorado. That's what we're seeing across the nation. Literally in almost every swing state, we have someone running for Secretary of State who has been fear-mongering about the 2020 election or was at the insurrection. Democracy will be on the ballot in 2022. The growing roster of such candidates amounts to merely the latest step in that progression, which includes the ouster of Cheney from a House leadership position after she rejected Trump's stolen election claims, as well as the censure of state officials, including Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, after he refused to contest Trump's defeat there. And I suggest that he won't refuse that again, if he even wins. Legislatures in Arizona and Georgia have also passed laws shifting power over elections to themselves. This will lead us to, I think, eventually a reading of Benji Sarlin's article about what's keeping election officials and others and historians up at night, mentioned by Greg, but I think deserving of a review in its own right. The dynamic threatens to upend Republican primaries, and in some cases already has. Last month, Williams, who we started with in this piece, defeated a 14-year incumbent to the Virginia House of Delegates in a primary after claiming he had seen evidence of fraud while working as a lawyer for the Trump campaign on a lawsuit seeking to overturn the Wisconsin election result. The incumbent, finally we find out, Charles Poindexter, boasts top ratings from the NRA as well as the Socially Conservative Family Foundation. Williams is widely expected to win easily in the fall in a safely Republican district in Virginia's rural South Side. He said that he has not seen any evidence of fraud, Williams said of his opponent, who did not return calls seeking comment. And I said I had seen evidence, because obviously I had played the role of lawyer for Trump in Wisconsin. Just played the role, of course, that's all. So that was it. It was, one guy said, well, I haven't seen any evidence, as opposed to saying, no, it's stupid, it's crackpot, it's baseless. He hadn't seen any evidence because there is no evidence. Not enough. You've got to say, well, I did see evidence. Was it good evidence, bad evidence, real evidence, fake evidence, evidence of something else, evidence of a different kind of fraud? I don't know. I'm now going to cross my arms in a huff and use that as my campaign photo. In fact, no evidence of widespread fraud emerged in Wisconsin, where the lawsuit Williams worked on was dismissed and where a recount in the state's two largest and most heavily Democratic counties affirmed Biden's victory. In other words, I'm running for office as a lawyer for Trump. I say I saw evidence, and I brought a case. Now, you brought this case yourself? Were you like the lead attorney in all this? I don't actually know. But let me say this. That case was thrown out of court. But elect me because I was fighting for, goodness and right. But you did such a bad job at it that you lost, like overwhelmingly. You were just tossed out on your ear, and you were able to produce nothing in terms of evidence that anybody else would believe. And even though you got a recount in the state's two largest and most heavily Democratic counties anyway, you lost those recounts as well. by God, you're the man for this job. Trump, the most popular figure in the Republican Party, has repeatedly threatened to punish those who do not echo his claims by injecting himself into primaries. And I guess he just feels like it's a credible threat that he can say, I can be in every primary. There's now like 700 things going on, and he's going to endorse in every one of them. Now, normally, though, I will say this. Normally, you would say there's no way that anybody can inject themselves into every one of those primaries because it takes a long time to figure out what's going on, what are the dynamics, where can you win, where can you lose, what's a good idea to get involved in and what's not. And Trump doesn't care about any of those things. If you just give him a list of 700 people who are running to say that the people they're running against aren't sufficiently loyal, he will just endorse them. And if it turns out that next week you give him a list of 700 people and it's the exact opposite list and say that no, this time these people are pro-Trump and those people that you endorsed before are now anti-Trump, he'll just endorse the other list too. I mean, he just will. So I don't know. I guess you can credibly believe that he'll eventually insert himself in the race, but you could also, I mean, if you were serious about winning a Republican primary, you could prank call to Bedminster and say you're Rudy Giuliani, and if you can do his voice, or I don't know, make something up. Say you're Mohammed bin Salman, for God's sake, and do an accent and say, put me through to Mr. Trump, and then tell him, I just need to tell you that make up a name, Christmas Tree Jones in Alabama. I'm running for in the Republican primary, and you endorsed my primary opponent, but he just the other day said he didn't believe there was evidence of fraud. Sir. And what'd you say your name was? Christmas Tree America Jones. Christmas Tree America, is America your middle name? No, that's all my first name, Christmas Tree America. My middle name is Glock 45 caliber. Okay, so Christmas Tree America Glock 45 caliber Jones, right? Yeah. How do you spell that? Jones. Okay. Right, whatever. Okay, and then on he goes, and he'll just go ahead and make the endorsement, probably. Anyway, in a recent statement accusing Wisconsin House Speaker Robin Vos of failing to adequately fight to overturn Biden's win, Trump included a veiled promise to help recruit primary challengers to run against those who have displeased him. These Republican leaders, and he puts leaders in quotes here, need to step up and support the people who elected them by providing them a full forensic investigation, because forensic sounds cool. It's basically like saying, I want a tactical audit of Maricopa County. Why? Because the forensic one didn't work. And tactical sounds cool. I want a constitutional, tactical AR-15 audit. Okay, we're going to get it. Anyway, if they don't, I have little doubt that they will be primaried and quickly run out of office, because it has happened somewhere, so it'll happen everywhere, even though Trump's record in primaries is terrible. As a result, some candidates and GOP leaders have worked feverishly to ingratiate themselves with the former president. After Trump attacked him, Vos announced that a former state Supreme Court justice would lead a fresh probe of the 2020 election there. In Arizona, energy executive Jim Lamon, it's like lemon with an A, I don't know, Lamon, who is seeking the GOP nomination to challenge U.S. Senator Mark Kelly, has, you'll never believe it, embraced baseless claims of election fraud and purchased ad time on Fox News in New Jersey. Why? Remember, he's running in Arizona. Why has he bought ad time on Fox News in New Jersey? You know the answer already. Yes, it's thousands of miles from where he lives and where he's running in Arizona. He did it to win support from Trump while the former president summers at his golf club in Bedminster. That's how he spends his money. Wow, what a fiscal conservative, right? Anyway, Pennsylvania State Senator Doug Mastriano, who is contemplating a run for governor, recently told Trump he could engineer a post-election audit in his state like the one underway in Arizona. Like more than a dozen others, Mastriano also traveled to Arizona to witness the recount firsthand, which he didn't really need to do. If you're just going to do it in Pennsylvania. Who cares whether you're doing it like Arizona or not? But it's a free trip to Arizona and a way to get on Fox News without spending advertising dollars in Fox News in New Jersey to catch him while he's in Bedminster. Instead, Fox will tell Trump that you went to Arizona for free. That's the reason. And, of course, he billed it, I'm sure, to the state, which probably should be disallowed, but then maybe the state party would pick it up. I don't know, but they should make a fuss over it. Anyway, like more than a dozen others, Mastriano went to Arizona to get this free publicity. The people of Pennsylvania and America deserve to know the truth, Trump said after, I guess, finding out duly on Fox News afterwards, just as planned. Mark Fincham, a state House member running for Arizona Secretary of State, attended the January 6th protest in Washington, the insurgency, and though he has said he never came within 500 yards of the Capitol, what a chicken, and did not condone the ensuing violence, oh, that's going to hurt him. Video footage later emerged, this will help him, showing him in front of the building steps after it had been breached. So, lying, but lying to get off the hook for being blamed for the violence that he helped perpetrate on Trump's behalf. But after all, he really did help, so maybe somehow this will work. Why was he too chicken to say so? Shouldn't they say we want somebody who will unabashedly speak up for how close he got to participating in the insurgency for Trump? And the answer is, I don't know. If there's nobody else to vote for, then I'll vote for this one, even though I'm being inconsistent. He also tweeted a picture of people swarming the Capitol steps with the statement, "What happens when the people have been ignored and Congress refuses to acknowledge rampant fraud?" Yes, and I guess, these guys think, of course, they're the wronged party in all of this. So I wonder if they are looking, just to go all the way back to the beginning of the show, looking at the assassination of the president in Haiti and saying, that's what ought to be happening here because our voices have been ignored ever since we overran the Capitol and tried to assassinate the vice president. I think they actually believe that, believe it or not. Fincham, who did not respond to a request for comment, suggested in a podcast interview in May that he was hopeful that the review of Maricopa County ballots launched by the state Senate could lead to a reversal of Biden's victory in the state. We could reclaim our electoral college electors, he told Zach Payne, a pro-Trump activist whose podcast has provided a platform for QAnon-linked conspiracy theories. There's more. Shauna Bollock. Really? Bolick. Another House member in Arizona running for Secretary of State, they're fighting each other, proposed legislation this year that would give the legislature the power to set aside the popular vote and choose its own presidential electors. Mind you, this is a distortion of the power that they actually have. They are too chicken to declare outright that they are eliminating the primary elections or not even the primary, that they're eliminating the general election for president in Arizona and simply allowing the Arizona state legislature to appoint electors. That is a legitimate power that they could have. But instead they're saying, well, we'll have the election so that there's this illusion of democracy. But if Arizona's voters don't choose the Republican candidate for president, we will overturn that at the state level. This is something, this has been the Republican theory all along. It was the Republican theory in 2020 that they could do this, but most states, all the states, ultimately found that they didn't feel like they were on solid ground legally, simply abandoning the results of the election and overturning it in the legislature. But their solution to this is to give themselves that power so that they feel comfortable doing it next time if necessary. Again, though, the option that's actually constitutionally available is an either or. Either you have you participate in the general election and the popular vote winner in Arizona or any of these other states wins the electoral college votes, or the legislature can opt to appoint Arizona's electors in the electoral college. Or, there are other options. They can say we're going to have a sack race, for instance, and whoever wins whether it's the candidates themselves or proxies. But on a certain date, we're going to have a sack race or, whatever, a three-legged race where we tie together the inside legs of the two major party president and vice presidential candidates, and then we have a race, and whoever wins it gets our electoral votes. It's stupid, but it's something that the legislature constitutionally has actually got the power to do. I mean, it's what the founders intended, to have a three-legged race. I think, maybe. But so far our assumption has been that our founders intended something different. And traditionally, the two options were have an election or have elections for state legislature and then have the state legislature appoint those people. But they're too afraid to simply say that's what we're doing. We're fixing the results of Arizona's participation in the Electoral College by handing it to the overwhelmingly Republican Arizona state legislature. Why they won't do it, I don't know. I think they would probably find that was enormously popular with Arizona's Republicans. I guess the problem is that if the majority of people in the state are in fact Democrats and wanted to vote for Democrats and wanted the state's electoral votes to be cast for Democrats, but are gerrymandered out of the ability to express themselves in an election and have their decision honored, that they might have a Haiti situation on their hands. Except this time, instead of the president of Haiti being assassinated, it's the Republican legislators of Arizona. So, it's not unwise for them to avoid simply saying they're taking over. It's just, not honest. But that, what are you going to do? Politicians not being honest, gee whiz. Both sides. Not what I mean. Anyway, back to Shauna Bollock, who says, who also didn't respond to Washington Post inquiries, announced her candidacy for Secretary of State last month with a statement that called for securing elections, because everybody's for that, and noted that many Americans, quote, believe cheating likely affected the outcome of the 2020 election. There are some who believe that, but there aren't many who believe that the state legislature should just pick the Electoral College members for some reason. A top target for Trump allies is Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia, who refused Trump's entreaties to, quote, find the votes that would have allowed him to reverse Biden's victory in the state. He's being challenged by Jody Heiss, who's already gained Trump's endorsement. A pastor and former talk radio show host, Heiss was elected to Congress in 2014, like just yesterday, basically, largely by touting his opposition to homosexuality, big issue, but has since embraced Trump's false claims of election fraud and was among the GOP members of Congress who voted to block certification of Biden's Electoral College victory. It hasn't made much progress on opposing homosexuality, so I guess he's decided something new and more exciting has come along. Heiss was an early proponent of false claims of fraud. He told the pro-Trump news outlet Newsmax last November that he was, quote, not convinced at all, not for 1 second, that Joe Biden won the state of Georgia. In Washington state, Joe Kent, an Army veteran, is among a handful of Republicans who have announced plans to challenge Representative Jaime, it's not Jaime because I know it's Herrera Butler, who just goes by Jamie instead. Anyway, it's she, and that's actually quite a common spelling of Jamie, even though in Spanish it's Jaime, but no, Jamie. Okay, I was fooled by that, but yeah, you remember her. She was one of the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump in January. Kent has repeatedly questioned the outcome of the presidential race, appearing at America First rallies alongside purveyors of baseless conspiracy theories and tweeting in April, "We need to fight for election integrity. Do not reward incumbents that refuse to contest the 2020 election." Kent, no response to a request for an interview. In Michigan, Melissa Carone, or Carone perhaps, C-A-R-O-N-E, a former contractor for the election vendor Dominion Voting Systems, who drew ridicule after making outlandish claims of fraud at a legislative hearing in that state last fall. Oh, yes, we remember her. Has filed paperwork to run for a state House seat. Everybody thought she was drunk. Remember her? Okay, now you do. Some Republicans are worried that some of these candidates could thwart GOP efforts to pick up seats next year. Yeah. In Michigan, a state Senate committee issued a report last week denying continuing claims that rigged equipment and other fraud tainted the 2020 result there. Although the report attracted Trump's ire, it reflected concerns among Republicans that growing calls for post-election audits in numerous counties in the state had the potential to harm the party's electoral chances next year. All right, well, it goes on, and there are a couple more examples, but I think we've gotten through all the individuals named in this. No, here's one in Michigan. Michigan Republicans have been encouraging State Representative Anna. Was this a glitch, another Matrix glitch? Her name is Ann Boleyn, but Bollin. It looks an awful lot like it could be pronounced Ann Boleyn, but you know what happened to her. Anyway, she's the chairwoman of the House Elections Committee in Michigan. They've been encouraging her to run for Secretary of State. She has said Biden won the state, while another Republican who's seeking the office, Christina Caramo, has espoused Trump's unfounded claims. So they'll have a direct contest there, too. I mentioned that we ought to spend a little bit of time on Benji Sarlin's article, probably spend less than we wanted to here because we're running out of time. But what's keeping democracy experts up most at night? An overturned election, the prospect of it. And they're all stating pretty much what we just heard from the elections official in, where was it? I can't remember which state it was. But saying, yeah, basically it is a case of state legislatures controlled by Republicans granting themselves the power, the purported power, anyway, to overturn elections results that they don't like, particularly in the presidential election, and simply ignore the outcome of the popular vote. Now, I don't know that that will pass constitutional muster, but it's worrisome that there's a question, and it's worrisome, of course, that that would land in the lap of this particular Supreme Court. We don't know how they would deal with such a thing. By the way, what's keeping actual Republicans up at night? It is the work of undoing all of this and making it possible to reverse elections that they don't like the outcome of. So here's what Benji had to say in, let's say, 2 minutes or less. Congress is just beginning a new investigation into the January 6th riot at the Capitol, but the movement behind it remains as active as ever. Trump, as he references here, is frequently repeating his false claims of victory, plotting revenge against politicians who opposed his efforts to overturn the election, attacking key Republicans who refuse to back him up now, and hinting at a return to power, either through another presidential run or some other means. There's no legal avenue for Trump to reverse the 2020 results, but a half dozen scholars who study democracy and election laws told NBC News they are increasingly worried that 2024 could be a repeat of 2020, only with a party further remade in the former president's image and better equipped to sow disorder during the process and even potentially overturn the results. Obviously, the insurrection was horrific in its violence and its assault on democracy, but it didn't disrupt the true winner of the election, said Edward Foley, professor at Moritz College of Law at Ohio State University, who researches election law. What you don't want is to have it have been a reversal. Nightmare scenarios include local or state officials refusing to certify votes, governors and state legislatures submitting electoral votes that disagree with each other or overrule the apparent vote counts, fights over the legitimacy of judges overseeing the process, and the House and Senate disagreeing on the winner. A chaotic transition could create an opening for further violence, either from extremists attempting to disrupt the process again, or mass unrest if the winner is viewed as illegitimate. We should not pretend that these dangers are fantastical or that these are absurd hypotheticals, Rick Hasen, law professor at University of California, Irvine, says. Given what we saw Trump actually do in 2020, these things are now within the realm of possibility and need to be legislated against and organized against so that we have a fair election process going forward. I guess what worries everybody is that we are instead now seeing them legislated for and organized for, which, is a bit of a nightmare. Anyway, I don't know. I can't get through the rest of it, of course, but I can't make it any plainer than we've already done. I think we've done a fairly decent job of explaining the efforts on to simply award themselves, these Republican state legislatures, the right to overturn an election without any, offer of proof being made or whatever, just if they don't like the outcome of the election. I mean, I'm sure that they probably would base it on claims of fraud, but if you were writing the rules, I guess you can write yourself a rule that says you don't actually have to submit any evidence, you just simply have to have a vote. Like, for instance, do you need to submit any evidence? Just to give you a sense of how this could happen, right? If you wanted to eliminate the filibuster, and I know that you do, and you're having one of these majority votes, say you convince Sinema and Manchin to go along with it, right? Is there any opportunity to submit any evidence or any requirement that any evidence be submitted that proves that the filibuster, is anti-democratic and therefore has to go? No, there's no reason to submit any evidence. You just simply say, I don't know, I have 50 votes, so therefore we're doing it. That's the same thing that they're proposing in these state legislatures. We don't care if there's evidence of fraud. It doesn't require evidence of fraud. And if it did, for some reason, require evidence of fraud, we would simply deem the evidence to have been presented. And we have the majority, and we're voting to reverse the results of the election. That's all there is to it. Just so you know.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, that's not all there is to the Netroots Radio listening day, of course. Justice Putnam comes up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and he'll be reviewing, any number of things that we've had to ignore during the day, including more action in Arizona, where a Second Amendment sanctuary law is on the books.